Hi, everyone. Ilia Chavchavadze. The recording of the previous tour is still available. I'm going to keep it in open access because, well, if you missed the first episodes, it might, well, it's not really the end of the world, but you might want to check out the beginning because obviously I'm not going to repeat myself too much. Otherwise, really wouldn't make much sense. So, Ilia Chavchavadze, he was the 19th century poet, writer, publicist, philosopher in many ways, journalist, publisher, donor, event planner, and a spiritual leader of so many Georgians. I'm showing you now photographs of Tbilisi, and you've seen photographs of the old city. You've seen what it looked like, let's say, around the turn of the 20th century. And Tbilisi started growing at a frantic pace, from mid-19th century, with a lot of investment coming from the Russian Empire, which had occupied it shortly before that in 1801 officially, around that time, but also the oil money and a lot of industries around oil refineries and oil transportation, railroad construction. So there was really great upheaval. Well, there was, let's say, no, it's not really upheaval, but so on the one hand, finances, technologies, and just the life was getting better, but Georgian national identity, Georgian language, Georgian culture was really experiencing great upheaval, was experiencing uh, probably some of the most difficult times. And it wasn't the first time for Georgia, and hopefully it was the last time when at some point people even forgot, well, started forgetting how to speak Georgian because all that was happening, obviously under the Russian Empire and Russian culture, Russian language, because of Russian investment and, well, Russian national politics. This was a very a very so I'm not saying that Russia was doing something different than any other, colonizing country would do. It's just the same thing. That was the policy, right? You conquer the country and you try to suppress all revolutionary or, well, contradicting views and movements, and that was happening. So there was a great potential in the country. And Ilia Chavchavadze was one of the people who made sure this would never happen and this wouldn't happen again to the Georgian people. He lived on the left side, on the left bank of Kura River. That was a modern, upscale neighborhood. There, well, the photograph, there's a monument to Mikhail Vorontsov, who was the viceroy of the Romanovs. And I'm saying that because that was the new up and coming neighborhood of a very up and coming city in the Caucasus, like the Big Apple of the Caucasus. We can definitely say that, and it was a prestigious area to live in. And it also was the area. It was very international. There were a lot of foreigners living in Tbilisi at that time, and also traveling to Tbilisi. There was the really great time of change, but it with the price, again, at the expense of Georgian, well, national identity. This is just 5 minutes, maybe even less than 5 minutes away from the monument to Viceroy Romanov, Mikhail Voronov, is the house of Ilia Chavchavadze. It didn't belong to Chavchavadze solely. It was actually owned by his sister, who married into another aristocratic family. Chavchavadze was an old dynasty, noble blood. So yes, you could say, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but there was a lot of Georgian aristocracy. Uh, mm, but what Chavchavadze accomplished in his throughout his 70-year-old life, well, very few, I would say, very few of us, maybe even, I don't even know how to put it, but I would say that sometimes the impact of one person just absolutely impossible to overestimate, and it's worth of, let's say, the the well, the accomplishments of, maybe. I mean, maybe that's something that's definitely what a lot of my Georgian friends and a lot of Georgians think. Welcome to the house of Ilia Chavchavadze. We continuing where we stopped last time. This is the dining room, and well, as you watch these tours, you see the interiors. Well, it doesn't look very Georgian, right? It looks like basically nearly every European house, or like say St. Petersburg or Moscow house, or maybe a house in Eastern Europe. Well, the furniture, they don't expect to see a lot of interiors. I mean, the wall decorations, they have only been preserved in a bedroom and a little bit more in other areas. But you have the furniture that belong to Chavchavadze. You have the porcelain, the silverware, some the fireplace is original to the house, of course, and just all the belongings in this apartment. It's either personal belongings of Chef Chavade, or the gifts from friends, from let's say people who admired his activity, which I started talking about last time, and I barely covered, I don't know, 80%, 20% of everything that this man accomplished. Well, but anyway, so he was definitely the man of a Renaissance man. He was, yes, educated, had connections. He started in St. Petersburg. He traveled across Europe, and he was fluent in many languages. But he was raised by a mother who would every day before sleep read to him and his siblings in Georgian and would encourage them to speak Georgian. Yeah, sorry. And would encourage them to speak Georgian as well, which many of the same generation just stopped doing, because Georgian language would not bring you the money. It would not help you excel in your career. You won't get ahead by using Georgian. One could only get ahead by using Russian or French, because it was the language of commerce. So that's how things work. Ilia Chavchavadze didn't start his writing career just from his early childhood, but he showed talent for the Georgian language and the poetry from his early years. But his family and he himself wanted to make sure he got, good education in law, and he started law at St. Petersburg, but he returned to Georgia and never really graduated at that point. From his early childhood, he loved Georgia. He was raised, as a patriot. And his motto, his position against the Romanovs was not complete denial or overturn of monarchy, but um, he wanted to reach some sort of, to be given some sort of autonomy, at least within the Russian Empire. And that's what he was hoping for. He knew that, just Georgian complete independence from the Russian Empire, that was quite unrealistic. But he at least was putting forward, and he was very diplomatic with regards to actually negotiating this in legal terms, in diplomatic terms, with the Romanovs. Now, how this could work. And no wonder he was under secret surveillance. He was 24/7. He was supervised. He was followed and spied on by the Tsar's police. So, and no matter what, so let's say things didn't work out with the Romanovs. Things didn't really work the way he wanted. His proposals, his ideas were denied, were turned down, but he still could do something. He worked with a lot of Georgians to at least prepare Georgia for its independence. And how you will prepare the country? Well, at least you make sure that the people don't forget where they came from and who they are. So Georgi Kartvelishvili was a close friend of Ilia Chavchavadze. He was, it's another like noble family. And by the way, Kartvelishvili, actually, Kartli, it's Sakartvelo, it's the land of Kartli. This is the name of the Georgians used to refer to their country. So it's one of the oldest and very Georgian last names that one can come up with. It's the last name could be translated something like the Georgian, Georgi the Georgian, a son of Georgia, something like that, because Shvili actually means the son. So a son of a Georgian. That's what it is. So Georgi Khatrilishvili is known as one of those aristocrats and business people who donated incredible sums of money to support the country. And for example, we know Khatrilishvili. I've mentioned him many times. We've known his collaboration with Mihai Zici, who was a Hungarian-born artist. He was the court artist of the Romanovs, but also he was invited by Kartvelishvili to Georgia, and together with Ilia Chavchavadze, they worked on the publishing of translation of not translation, but publishing of the poem "The Knight and the Panther's Skin" in Georgian with beautiful illustrations. And Mihai Zici was absolutely charmed by Kartvelishvili, and he agreed to do the illustrations free, to make illustrations free of charge. And Kartvelishvili spent 12,000 rubles, that's like a lot of money, on just putting everything together with Chavchavadze and many other members of nobility. They put everything together. They collected manuscripts of The Knight and the Panther's Skin from different families, making sure which version would be the main one. They put everything into printing. There had been printed versions of the book, but there was no one unified version, and they were also very expensive. They wanted to make sure the book would turn out nice, it would turn out beautiful, but also not that expensive. So they accomplished that, and it was very important because The Knight and the Panther Skin is the most important poem in the entire Georgian history. In the meanwhile, we are in the dining room. And so this is one of the rooms that actually has the original decoration. It's not that bad. So as I said, there would be some rooms where you could see not only the furniture, but also just the traditional setting. And you see the decorations on the walls. You see this is the frescoes, and you see the furniture, and you see the porcelain, the Limoges porcelain that the family had. And at this very table, Kartvelishvili and Mihai Zici would dine together, and this is when they would discuss this big work of publishing the Night Panther Skin book. Also at this table, a frequent guest was Joseph de Baye, who was an archaeologist of the French origin, who mostly interested in the Middle East and the Caucasus, and he conducted some excavations in Georgia. And there were also many other visitors who were frequent guests in the house of Chavchavadze. It was kind of a fixture. So the jour fixe is French, so it has to be noun, and then and then the adjective attribute. So the jour fixe, like fixed days at on which the gatherings would be held. So it was Thursdays. So Joseph was the frequent guest. A lot of enlightened foreigners. Well, this is the area where a lot of Europeans live because the German colony is just around the corner. There were a lot of Churchill had a lot of friends among the foreign visitors or foreign or expats living in the city for this or that reason. For example, one of his closest friends actually wasn't a Georgian. It was Arthur List or Leist. I know that it should be pronounced Leist, but here everyone says Arthur's List. So Arthur List was he originally was not the resident of the German colony, but when he came to Georgia first, just as traveler, he fell in love with the country, with the beauty of its nature, and also with its literature. And Arthur Least was a poet himself, and he started learning the Georgian language, and he became the translator. He translated um, a lot of Georgian literature into German and vice versa. And obviously, because of that, he became really friendly with Chavchavadze. He first sought for his professionalism, for his opinion, because I'm not sure if Chavchavadze spoke German, but I'm sure they had a common language, and things were okay among them. They were on the same page for sure. So Arthur List was so much into Georgia that he actually lived in Georgia for 20 years. He moved to Georgia and he's buried in the Diduba Pantheon in Tbilisi. And we haven't been there yet. So I'm planning to take it to another cemetery just to see some, outstanding personalities. We'll talk about their life, not about their death, but about their life. So um, exactly at this very room, at this very table, which, by the way, obviously were more tables. And the next room, the drawing room, would have a longer table where more guests would have a seat. And here the feast would last for hours and hours. And in this very room and in this very apartment, I would say that I don't think I'm exaggerating here. Maybe even the fate or the future of Georgia was decided, at least in cultural terms. Or, well, um, William Morphel. So you see this 1894. It's a portrait. They're not really good portraits, unfortunately, of William Morphel. But well, there is in Oxford there is this plaque, memorial plaque. William Richard Morphel was the first professor of Russian and Slavonic languages, and also he was quite fluent in Georgian, and he first came to Georgia just to explore it as part of the Russian Empire, but he fell so much in love with Georgia as an independent entity, well, and it's just a very different culture, that he also stayed in Georgia for a long time. He studied the language thoroughly as a linguist, of course, and Chavchavadze was really happy to see him. They spoke in Russian because William Morphy was fluent in Russian, and he is the founder of Slavonic and Russian languages at Oxford University. So it also happened in this room. It's amazing how they were able to restore the frescoes. Now, another, well, I would say a celebrity was John Oliver Wardrobe with his sister. John Oliver Wardrobe was a diplomat. He was an ambassador of Great Britain in Georgia, and he was the one who promoted Georgia and Georgian culture, well, outside of the Russian Empire. Now, he was a big supporter of Georgian independence. And when the Russian Empire collapsed and Georgia became independent, he was also there in the famous writer's house of Sarajishvili, which we visited about a month ago, I believe. And he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by his sister, Marjorie, who happened to be very fluent in Georgian, had a poetic talent, and she translated The Knight and the Panther Skin into English. He promoted this poem, published it, well, with their own funding in Great Britain, and she lived here full time for many years together with his brother. She had a lot of friends. This is her wearing a Georgian national costume. I'm not sure where the photograph was taken. Uh, she doesn't look very Georgian to me in this photograph still. I think there's something in the face, just not looking Georgian, but she was definitely considered a local here, by Maddie because, well, she she admires Georgian culture, and she and her brother financed the publications and translations into English of other works, not only by Fyodor Rustaveli, of course. And it's not, it didn't boil down only to Fyodor Rustaveli, and they asked for opinion and expertise of Ilia Chavchavadze upon the choice of literature pieces to be published. And it was Chavchavadze who um, made sure that the translations were correct, the translations into English, because he was fluent in English as well. There are a lot of photographs from numerous get-togethers. Wardrobes were friendly with a lot of Georgian families, a lot of. And do I have to tell you that there was a small amateur theater where anyone could participate, and they had a lot of fun. There is a monument to the wardrobes in the downtown of Tbilisi, not far from the Rustaveli Avenue. And by the way, Rustaveli Avenue, they're this main artery of Tbilisi. A big section of it is now closed for roadworks, and that's the reason why I'm late a little bit today, because we had to just go around. Basically, we had to drive along the mountains, just in the mountains, trying to find a shortcut. Anyway, so this dining room has it's just incredible. So when they got down to the restoration of the house, walls were simply painted over, and little by little, it was a meticulous, really, really long restoration, but they were able to uncover the old frescoes and then they just restore them. Carl Friedrich Lemonhot was another friend of Chavchavadze and another visitor, well, a German who was a philosopher and a scholar. He was one of the people that connected Chavchavadze to the big German community in Georgia, which basically started like 5 minutes away from this very house where Chavchavadze lived. I'm a big fan of this fireplace, but also I really really like this bedroom. Sorry that. So nobody really knows about the, let's say, the furnished, well, how the room looked, what was where. There are no photo descriptions because it's just a bedroom. It's a private room. No guests were really allowed here. Just some family members, and there's not really that much that could be told with regards to how accurate the layout is. But we have the original wall decoration, quite subtle. We have the original bed. What is very rare is that we have the original bed, the original bedside and the painting there. This is totally original, and it hasn't even been restored, just basically cleaned up. That's what we were told. I know it's just, it's not the king size bed. It was only used by one person. Um, I don't know where the second bed is, but it was common, the spouses slept on separate beds and they could just, put it together. That's what a lot of people did. But originally, that's how it used to be. And having the bed, I actually envy Georgia. There are so many beds that have been preserved. In Russia, that's a whole different story. I mean, in St. Petersburg, we don't really get we don't really get to see this many original 19th century or 18th century beds, unfortunately. But everything you see was served by the family of Chavchavadze and his wife Elena Gramishvili. They didn't have children of their own, which you might remember, but Chavchavadze had siblings, and also nearly every Georgian felt related, so to speak. Have a look just at the beautiful mirror and some items on it. This is Elena Gramishvili in her I would say a young age when she married Chavchavadze. So, nearly every Georgian, related to considered themselves related to Ilia, or just refer to him as Ilia, which is not really about the familiarity, but it's just about the how closely related you are to the person. That's true. Georgians just still say, "Oh, this is Ilia." We will talk about it later on. So there were a lot of people who helped uh, preserve the memory of Ilia Chavchavadze, especially with some, belongings or gifts. Some people after his death, they also started, keeping or bringing the things that Chavchavadze gave them before. We are looking at the garden, which I took you also in the previous episode. I love the garden. And you can see also that well, I showed you also the model in the previous tour, that the house looks like the letter U, English letter U. And it's technically speaking, it was just the simple residential building where people just rented their apartments from the family of Yelizaveta Chavchavadze, the sister to Ilya. And later on, as far as we understand, Ilya purchased uh, about a half of the house, and also kept on living, just occupying several rooms on the upper floor. And it was not only just, his apartment where he lived, but also it was his office. Right now, in this wing of the museum is the administration. Well, this is the administration of the museum, but the right part of the house, it's still residential, by the way. This is what used to be one of the drawing rooms. And there's no decoration, but I like it that they've chosen this blue palette, and I like the dishes that they use as a decoration. Here we have some photographs, from family gatherings, and I absolutely love the sofa. This is the original sofa, the original uh, Georgian rugs and carpets. It's one of their traditional crafts in Georgia, and the original sofa that belonged to Chavchavadze. And this is the photograph taken in the early 1900s of Ilia Chavchavadze having a big gathering and a visit of the exarch of the Georgian church at his home in Saguramo, where we were about a month ago or so. So and this is the small piece, as I was told by one of the guides at the museum, that this is a small piece of a tablecloth that, well, that at some point the table in the house of Chavchavadze was laid with. Uh, just a beautiful tablecloth. What can I say? And there is another room that is full of personal belongings of Elena Gramishvili and Chavchavadze. And now I think it's time to talk a little bit more about his other activity. And in this room, we mainly talk about his accomplishments and his impact uh, in his work, predominantly in the area of Ajara region, which is where Batumi is. That's where I'm heading to for the next weekend. and in Abkhazia, which is now occupied by Russia. This for a long time, for 300 years basically, and we're still in the second half of the 19th century. We are in the 1870s at this point. And Chavchavadze died in 1907. Uh, for 300 years, these territories of Georgia, like Western Georgia, were under the Ottomans. And finally, in 1870s, the Russian Empire won just another Russian-Turkish war and liberated these parts of what used to be Georgia. So these lands have always been Georgia, had always been Georgia, and have always been Georgia. And well, the Russian army, together with the Georgian army, fought against the Ottomans, and they liberated these regions. However, so just imagine for 300 years of the Ottoman influence, many Georgians converted to Islam. And it was so far from Tbilisi that it, well, that the, let's say the work and the influence of the big capital just didn't really reach that far. By the way, the black and white photograph as a backdrop, it's the old city of Batumi. And when it became possible, when these lands were liberated, Chavchavadze went to Batumi, and he worked tirelessly to develop the city, to open schools, the well later on a theater as well, a book publishing. He made sure that the Iveria newspaper, which he was the editor in chief of, would be published there. And because people didn't speak Georgian, people speak mainly Arabic. Well, the language of the Ottoman Empire. Well, Turkish, Arabic. A lot of Georgians were Muslims. So what Chavchavadze did, again, for him, it was important just to preserve the Georgian language and the Georgian identity. And Chavchavadze considered those Georgians Georgians. They were of a different faith, but they were still the Georgians. They still spoke the same language. Well, they were supposed to speak the same language, but many did not. So he made sure he got enough support from the nobility to open schools, to open hospitals, to open different facilities to help to publish books and school books. And also, Chavchavadze made sure that Quran would be translated into Georgian. I didn't know that before. So I knew, of course, from my tours and preparations for the Jara tours, Batumi tours, I knew that, yeah, so the of the Ottoman influence and a lot of Muslims living in that area, but I didn't know that Chavchavadze somehow got David Sarajishvili, who was the brandy king, right? We visited his house several months ago. Well, so also called writer's house. I'm sure you remember, at least some of you must remember. So Sarajishvili, at his own expense, just with his own money, published about 2,500 copies of Quran translated from Arabic into Georgian. And I think it's just so meaningful that next weekend I'm going to be live streaming from Batumi, and we're going to be walking the streets of the city that within less than a couple of decades, from a small forgotten village, grew into a big port city with investments coming from the Noble family, Rothschild's family, and many, many others. So obviously oil was also involved, but it could have been very different. So we are now in the room where well, they first of all have these decorations on the walls here. These are basically the elements of decoration that they have been able to kind of save. Well, I know it's just, parts of the ceiling decoration, some frieze, some cornices, maybe. I know that, parts of some plaster, not much. So, and you can see that the rest is really just nothing, just, walls and some photographs on it, a lot of descriptions. This room is all designed in books about the death of Chavchavadze. Ilia Chavchavadze was assassinated in 1907. He was 70 years old. He was assassinated by a group of Georgians. He was on his way. I spoke about it before, but I'm going to be, well, I need to be talking more about it now and add some more details into this. So they were returning, well, to Saguramo in a place called Tsisamuri. And it was just them and a horseman. They were in a carriage. They stopped at a spot, where they would usually stop by the spring to have some water, to have a rest. And people on horses approached them, pulled out a gun, and Ilia said, "Don't shoot me, I'm Ilia." And the guy said, "That's exactly why I need to kill you." And this is when Elena Gramishvili said, "Don't kill him, kill me, because he is the only person who could, grant a better future for this country." So she was knocked out and severely beaten with bayonets, and Chevchavadze was killed, point blank. And we still have no idea who killed him. Well, you can see a lot of uh, well, there's a photograph on the wall. How shall I say, of the funeral procession. It stretched for kilometers, for miles. Also, you see this, well, um, mourning sash with inscriptions, with messages coming from all around the world, in Georgian, Russian, and other languages. So they were all given by people, laid on the coffin and also kept on the cemetery. The We know who executed it. We know who made the shootings, right? Who actually shot Chavchavadze. Almost all the people were caught, and three of them were executed. And by the way, Ilia Chavchavadze tirelessly fought against the capital punishment law, which was enforced in Russia. He truly believed that capital punishment is only up to God, to decide who would leave and who would not. But he tirelessly fought against it, but it was not really of any success. And the three people that participated, that were involved in the killing of Chavchavadze, were executed. One person escaped, one person died in prison before the execution. And Elena Goramishvili, the inconsolable widow, she begged the government not to execute the killers, um, because Ilia wouldn't have wanted that. But they wouldn't listen, and of course, they were executed. Elena Gramishvili never remarried. She moved from Saguramo. She moved from this house to a small building next to Tatsmin, the cemetery, Tatsmin, the Pantheon, where Chavchavadze was buried. His grave is still there. I haven't taken you to Tatsmin, the cemetery, but I think at some point I'll have to take you to the cemeteries. I know not everyone is a fan of cemeteries, but it's those cemeteries where you don't really talk about death, but you talk about the life and the accomplishment of people. We are back to the lobby. So again, the memorial part is actually on the second floor. Because this is where Chavchavadze lived. What we saw in the previous episode, and it's still available, you can still find it on my YouTube channel. It's just part of the museum, and this used to be the original entrance, by the way. This is the original tiles, the original steps, marble steps, but I have no idea whether there were any decorations on the walls, any frescoes on the walls. There must have been. This was quite an expensive house to live in. It must have been expensive, but at some point, as probably I told you last week, At some point, about 60 families, so 50 families live in this house. It's a big one. So 2 floors, quite two big wings, and several of them. That was it. So now, as I said, the central part is the museum exhibit, and for exhibitions, another wing is for the museum administration, and the rest is where people actually lived. So, speaking just a little bit more about Chavchavadze, as I said, in every town of Georgia, in every village, there is a street named after him. There is an alley, or I don't know, a dead end, or something named after Chavchavadze, which makes sense. So the accomplishments of this person, again, the newspapers, educating people about the political life, about the cultural life, about literature pieces and new literature, new works published in Georgia language. He was the head of the committee that selected works for translations, for publications, and new literature, new writers, emerging writers. Also, apart from that, for okay, you can take it. Yes. What was I talking about? Yeah. So sorry. Just a second. Yeah. um, he knew that just, well, you know, promoting Georgian language and opening schools, encouraging the theater productions in the Georgian language wasn't enough. He, as I said, he got the education from the law school. He eventually graduated, but not from St. Petersburg. So he was also a civil judge. He also tried to put forward several projects that could, at least kind of have some sort of loopholes through the legislation in the Russian Empire that Georgia could benefit from. Also, again, he was a diplomat. He never considered himself the enemy of the Russian Empire. He never considered himself an enemy of the Romanovs. No, that was not the case. He was not a revolutionary, and he simply just wanted the Georgian people to speak their language, to read their literature, and just have the dignity. That was it. And he brought back this tradition, giving women that were within they were about to get married. The girls, as part of their dowry, would be the book, would be the copy of the Knight of the Panther's Skin poem by Rustavelli. And but at some point, people started forgetting how to read Georgian, and this tradition was forgotten for several decades in the 19th century. And then only thanks to Chavchavadze and the book that was published with the illustrations of Mihai Zici, this tradition was brought back to life and people started doing it again. So I think that it's just several of the accomplishments, again, promoting education and just um, improving the lives of the Georgian people, improving their education. So all these things. Well, I used to think for a long time that like this was maybe a little bit hyped up, all his impacts, all his activity, but actually it's only a fraction of what Chavchavadze actually did for the people. And he truly loved the people. He just loved people. Yeah. Okay. So this has been. I try to keep it, short and sweet. I try to stick to the facts. I tried to stick just to some accomplishments and what impact they had on the country. Well, his death, the entire country was mourning, and it was people. It just was just an incredible loss. In the newspapers, just imagine all the newspapers after the assassination. They just called for the people who were involved, especially those who ordered Chavchavadze to be killed. They addressed them saying, you don't need to come forward. You don't need to come clean. You don't need to, turn yourself into the police, but just, think about what you have done. Think about, or think of the outcome. Like, what did you ask for it? And we still don't know who it was. Could it be, some Russians? Unlike what kind of who among the Georgians who could this have could this be? It could be some socialists. It could be some socialists. There are also a lot of people who did not like the idea of or translation of Quran into Georgian. Could it be some Muslim fanatics? Um, Most likely not. So Georgians, in the museum, also I asked the museum guide and in other places, they believe it was some Georgians, and it's really difficult to say what the reason was, and we probably never know. But well, at least those who performed that, those who were just there, really just pulling the trigger and killing Chavchavadze and injuring the his wife or widow, well, they were punished. Rest is history. So, my dear friends, let me open the chat for questions. Let me know if you have them, and I will try to answer them. Obviously, I'm not a specialist in Georgian literature. Unfortunately, I cannot read in Georgian, which, well, I don't speak Georgian, fluently enough to read the original poems of Chavchavadze in Georgian. Let me share with you the links. In about 20 minutes from now, I will be taking you to Jerusalem, and I will be talking about some. Sorry, Dole, I'm not sure what you're talking about on the chat. I need to see it again. And my chat is being very slow. I'm not sure why, but it looks like I'm seeing messages with still from the beginning. I'm not sure. I need to double check. But at least I can share the links. So the link for the Jerusalem tour is there. And next weekend, I'm taking you to Batumi with the World Virtual Tours. I will be also taking you for another tour of Sheremetyevo Palace, which is the Museum of Musical Instruments. And I'm going to be showing you the collection of musical instruments that belong to the Romanovs. And then on the 2nd of August, there is a tour called From Hell to Zion. Some more mind-blowing archaeology of the Hinnom Valley is coming your way. So for these several upcoming several tours, I'm going to be taking you to hell, because the Hinnom Valley is actually the Gehenna, or the hell that we know from the Bible. That's actually the biblical hell is in this valley where I'm taking you starting today, actually, starting tonight in 20 minutes, in less than 20 minutes. And from hell, we're going to be going up the Zion, Mount Zion, the actual Mount Zion, and with so much archaeology, layer after layer, layer under a layer. Just that. 54 degrees in Eilat, not important. Okay, I got it. Yeah, I think it's just relevant to what we were talking about. You can't wait to go to hell, of course, Dorley. Yes, we can't wait to go to hell. Let's go to hell. Exactly. And so tonight, then the 2nd of August, and then the 9th of August, we're still going to be traveling between Hell and Mount Zion. But also, which it's not yet on the schedule, but I'm planning something very special on the 9th of August as well. Another very special family visit and a very special family experience done together with. But I will keep you posted. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Thank you for those who supported us and also Grisha on the previous tour. And if you missed the previous tour, it's my yesterday's live stream where I actually played in a lighthouse on a live stream tour. You're more than welcome to check it out. It's going to be in open access. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. I know it's a very niche tour. I didn't expect a lot of people, but I'm just so happy that I can spread a word about Georgia, which is still unspoiled and so not really discovered. I'm really happy that I've been able to do it at least, among in this short, a very, very small crowd and within this very short limit of time. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your interest in what I do. Thank you for your support. As they say, Maria is saying, so your comment has just come through. As they say, big scoundrels drive around the chariots while the small ones get hanged. And do hell with it. Exactly, Maria. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, I will be able to get changes before the next one because you see, it just basically jumped on the tour because it took me 40 minutes to get home after the previous one. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for everything and for your support. Bye bye.